Hey guys, Eric with Blue Line Fishing. Welcome back to the channel. Your time's important to me as always, and what we're gonna do in today's time is we're gonna talk wind and how it affects your fishing, good or bad. Stick with me, we're gonna jump right into it. So wind, like we've got here today, we've got a little bit of breeze, but this morning has been pretty windy. We've had a pretty steady early this morning, 10 to 15 mile an hour winds with gust over 20. And how does that affect your fishing? You know, a lot of guys hate fishing in the wind. And it can be a pain. You know, you got to stay on the trolling motor the whole time. You've got to worry about backlashing. There's a lot of different factors when you're fishing with the wind. But I think fishing in windy conditions is the best time to go. I would say 8 times out of 10, so about 80% of the time, when I catch big fish or when I catch big numbers of fish, I've got those windy conditions, just like this morning. And I'm gonna show you guys some footage here of fish I've caught this morning. And I've had 4 fish, 3 that were over 4.5 and 1 that was over 5. So a really good morning. Caught some other fish too in the 2 to 3 pound class and some smaller ones. But I've had real good luck this morning catching some bigger fish, and I attribute it to this wind we've got. And I'm gonna try and get the camera out of the mount here in a minute. I'm gonna show you what kind of pattern I put together this morning that I think helped me catch those fish, but it was all because of the wind. Okay guys, here's the setup. The wind's coming out of the northwest, and it's coming straight down the lake here. But you can see this point right here, and then about this 50-60 yard section of bank with that standing timber and fallen timbers where I've caught all my fish. I believe the reason being, I think when you've got wind like we do today, and you know, those bigger gusts and a steady wind, it gets that whole ecosystem going. In other words, you've got the wind blowing, it gets the plankton and the microorganisms going, which gets the bait fish going, which in turn turns those bass on to feed. And I'm gonna show you footage here of a bass that had a great big shad tail sticking out of its gullet, and all these bigger fish came from this stretch here. Why? Because this wind is wrapping around this section of bank right here, and it's just a perfect ambush spot. I think that's one thing you've got to think about when you're fishing, is where are the perfect ambush spots for these fish to feed. So in this clip here, what I'm doing, I'm working this section of bank that I showed you, making these pocket casts. You can see how I cast up in there in this little pocket of timber, trying to work this chatterbait around, just like a shad that's flipping around in there, and end up sticking this fish here. Ends up being a good fish, tries to run me underneath the boat, around the side of the boat, but it's on that same stretch of bank that I was talking about earlier where these fish, I believe, are stacked up. Like I say, because I caught several nice fish in this, and I fished a number of different areas throughout the day of the lake, but kept coming back to this because those fish were stacked up in there, and I believe they were because of the wind that was involved. You can see here the belly on this dude. That thing is full of shad, and I'll show you a little still photo here in a second because it still had a shad tail sticking out of its mouth. Just really good fish, but once again, up there because of those windy conditions, in my opinion. So guys, now that you can kind of see the setup I've got behind me here, and this bank continues on down for probably another 250, 300 yards. But that section is what I keyed in on, the reason being, and it's one of the first areas I keyed in on this morning, because you have this wind that's at my back right now, coming down the lake and wrapping around that point. That's something to look for when you guys are out there fishing in windy conditions, is look for those places that would be the perfect ambush spot. Like I said just a second ago, I think it gets the whole ecosystem going. I mean, as far as you've got that plankton moving when you got the wind, the bait fish are coming in to feed, and then you've got those game fish that are coming in this case bass, to feed on those bait fish. And I actually, I've got a little footage of it, lost it at the boat, but I had about probably a 7 or 8 pound channel catfish this morning that I had hooked on a chatterbait. So it's just not the bass that are in there feeding. I mean, it's a perfect ambush spot. So I think you've got all kinds of predator fish in there feeding. But that's one of the things to keep in mind, like say these windy conditions. Just try and think like a bass, try and think like a fish. You know, where would you set up to get the easiest meal? And right behind me here, this section of lake has the wind wrapping right around that point. When it wraps around that point, it's an easy place for them to sit where those bait fish are going to congregate, and they're going to congregate there, I believe, because of the wind and what they're feeding on. It's just a symbiotic relationship, you know, in this cycle where everything's in there to feed, and what we're after, the game fish, are also in there to feed. But I can't tell you how many times I've been out there on windy days and found these ambush spots, especially when you're talking main lake points, secondary points. You know, you've got some type of cover as you've got that cover and that wind's coming around it on either side of that cover, especially the seems to be usually 20-30 yards down that side of the cover is where those fish will stack up to feed. And of that section of bank over there, there was a section right there that was probably only 25 yards where I caught 2 of those bigger fish, and then I caught a couple other, you know, nice ones too in the 2 to 3 pound class. But it was that perfect spot to be just downwind, if you will, or where that current and that wind's pushing to push everything down there, and it kind of floats on by, swims on by, and those game fish, in this case bass, jump on it. So what type of baits do I like to throw on windy days? Well, you guys know spinner baits. If you watch the channel, it's my favorite bait to throw, and I know you guys have heard it as far as it's a great bait to throw on a windy day. And that's for good reason, because I think it is a great shad imitator. It can be a good bluegill imitator as well, but that's what I was throwing this morning. Double Colorado, number 4, number 2 Colorado, half-ounce size. It's something that I could throw against the wind. You know, I've been throwing against the wind all morning here, and I think it's another thing too. I don't like throwing with the wind. I like throwing against the wind because that bait comes back with the current, with the wind, and I think it's a more natural presentation. I mean, there'll be times that you're going to have to throw with the wind or sideways to the wind due to boat control or just the angle you can get. But if you can actually cast into the wind, once again, I know it's a pain, you're gonna probably have to deal with a few backlashes and stuff, but I think it'll be a lot more productive for you. So I was throwing the spinnerbait here, and then I was also throwing the Chatterbait Evo Elite, and that's the one right there. This was actually a 3/8 ounce size here, but I've got that shad imitator on there because I saw some shad flipping early this morning, and ended up catching that one that had the big shad down its gullet. And I just think that it's another great bait, power bait, to throw in these windy conditions. So my top choices would be the spinnerbait, the chatterbait, sometimes even a square bill crankbait. The only problem you get with the square bills, they can be kind of light and they're hard to throw into the wind. But I have a lot of success with the spinnerbait and the chatterbait, my 2 favorite to throw in windy conditions. Guys, one more thing I'll talk about is just the importance of practicing accurate casting. You'll see here the chatterbait just bounced off a lay down here, but I'm bringing this chatterbait in through the standing timber and lay down and brush piles that are here. But I'm making what I call pocket casts. So I'm trying to get back in all these little pockets in between all the timber, make contact with it, because a lot of times after that initial contact is when those fish will hit it or they'll follow it out and hit it. And that's actually what happens on this next cast here. Get back in the pocket, and what you can't see is some laydowns that are there just under the surface, bringing in contact with those. As soon as I get it on the other side of it, this fish hits. But it's just one of those things, if you can work on your casting accuracy, even when the conditions aren't ideal, it's really going to pay off for you guys in the long run. Guys, I hope you got something out of today's video. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out. Also, I'll leave some discount codes for you guys down in the description, along with some links to some of the baits that I was using here today. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And remember, until that next video, get out there and fish.